From top spy to top diplomat. An indigenous community protects its own. And the Pope's 5-year anniversary. What did you get him? Some residents in need of medical care were allowed to leave eastern Ghouta, Syria, the first medical evacuation from an area that's been under near constant attack by the Assad regime. The Damascus suburb is still controlled by rebels, and injured civilians were reportedly allowed to leave through an agreement between rebels and Assad's Russian allies. It's not clear just how many people were given safe passage. The UN has said more than 1,000 people need urgent medical treatment. The state of Florida told a judge today that it will seek the death penalty against Nicholas Cruz, who's confessed to killing 14 students and 3 staff members at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School last month. The 19-year-old has been charged with 17 counts of first-degree murder and 17 counts of attempted first-degree murder. Cruz's public defender has offered to have him plead guilty, but not if the death penalty is on the table. A spokesman who resigned last week from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement says he, quote, didn't feel like fabricating the truth to defend the agency. In an interview with the San Francisco Chronicle, James Schwab said that federal officials, including Attorney General Jeff Sessions, made false statements by claiming that 800 undocumented immigrants escaped a recent sweep because the mayor of Oakland warned the public about it. Schwab said, "We were never going to pick up that many people." An ICE spokesperson told Vice News that they disagree with Schwab's account. And the Justice Department told us that if anyone wants to argue, quote, over precisely how many dangerous criminal aliens eluded arrest because of the mayor's irresponsible actions, we are happy to have that debate. President Trump's personal assistant has been fired from his role in the White House, but he's already got a new job, working as a senior advisor for Trump's 2020 campaign. John McEntee is one of Trump's longest-serving aides. According to multiple reports, McEntee was fired because of an investigation into financial crimes. He hasn't commented, and the campaign didn't reply to a request from Vice News. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, "We don't comment on personnel issues." Austin police are searching for the person or people responsible for a series of deadly package bombings, and they say whoever's involved has shown some, quote, skill and sophistication because the packages didn't detonate until the victims picked them up. Since March 2nd, 3 separate packages left on doorsteps have killed 2 people and injured 2 others.
We've had 3 devices explode, so whether that's a hate crime or terrorism or organized crime, it's somewhat insignificant. What's significant is the effort to find who's making these devices to make sure that there's not a 4th or 5th device.
After months of letting Secretary of State Rex Tillerson twist in the wind, President Trump finally, officially fired him today with a tweet, followed by a final public kick in the pants.
We got along actually quite well, but we disagreed on things. When you look at the Iran deal, I think it's terrible. I guess it was okay. I wanted to either break it or do something, and he felt a little bit differently. So we were not really thinking the same.
In a 2 p.m. press conference, Tillerson appeared to choke back tears as he confirmed the news.
What is most important is to ensure an orderly and smooth transition during a time that the country continues to face significant policy and national security challenges.
Tillerson got the boot even as loads of key State Department positions remain unfilled, especially at the undersecretary level, and many more are held by temporary appointees. One of those is Heather Nauert Norby, the brand new acting undersecretary for public diplomacy, who replaced her boss after he was fired this morning for commenting on the Tillerson firing. The Swiss cheese org chart would seem to be a poor match for the enormous challenges facing American foreign policy, including upcoming direct negotiations with Kim Jong-un and figuring out a response to Russia's spy games. All of that will now fall to the incoming Secretary of State, current CIA Director Mike Pompeo.
When the news broke about Tillerson being out and Pompeo being in, someone who works at State currently told me there was no email to staff, no heads up, and right before Tillerson took to the briefing room today, still nothing in writing to the staff he praised. That staffer was left wondering about what all this means for the State Department, but he did say that with Mike Pompeo in charge, the new guy will probably have a larger seat at the table than Tillerson did. This is because Pompeo is actually able to get his calls answered at the White House. If you remember back in October, there were days of public discussion about whether Tillerson had called Trump a moron behind closed doors.
This is what I don't understand about Washington. Again, I'm not from this place, but the places I come from, we don't deal with that kind of petty nonsense.
Tillerson also had some other, more substantive problems when it came to the White House. As the president mentioned this morning, Tillerson wasn't in favor of fully ripping up the Iran nuclear deal, something Trump has been talking about since the campaign. And the secretary's last hurrah with the press while traveling in Africa this past weekend had him sounding much more forceful than the White House when it comes to questions about Russia's role in the poison attack in Great Britain on a former spy there. Add that to the fact that it's hard not to find a story every other day about the low morale at the State Department leading to a mass exodus of career staffers, and you have a Secretary of State with no home at the White House and no home in Foggy Bottom. Mike Pompeo, on the other hand, is firmly in the president's good graces. He personally delivers the presidential daily briefing almost every day, and when asked about the president's capabilities, doesn't call him a moron. And while Pompeo has been clear about Russia's role in trying to disrupt the 2016 election, he has used his position as the head of the CIA to back out of direct answers on whether Russia's actions were designed to help Trump or whether they affected the election at all.
The intelligence community's role is very clear. We talk about the things that happened, what the Russians did, what the other actors, not just Russians, have done historically in the United States to try and impact and influence American leaders. That's our function. We'll stick to that.
So he knows the right things to say in public. Even more importantly, he's said things that put him right in line with how Trump feels about the Iran nuclear deal.
The notion that the entry into the JCPOA would curtail Iranian adventurism or their terror threat or their malignant behavior has now, 2 years on, proven to be fundamentally false.
And because he has actually been confirmed by the Senate before, by a vote of 66 to 32, it's hard to believe he won't be confirmed as secretary. But the role of being the country's chief diplomat is a bit different than being the country's top spook. I talked to Yael Eisenstadt, who worked at both state and the CIA in the past, about the big differences between those two jobs.
The CIA director, his job is not to decide what policy should be. His role is to ensure that the best information is gathered, analyzed, and that he is presenting the most unbiased as possible information to the president for the president to make decisions. Now, at the State Department, it's a totally different role, right? As Secretary of State, you're the one who's actually the public face of our diplomatic branch, and therefore you actually should be chiming in on exactly what you think our foreign policy should be.
And she says Pompeo needs to fix the morale problem fast.
He is going to have to convince that building that he has their back. I mean, no matter what, we all know that he's very close to the president. It would serve him well to really make an effort to re-engage with career diplomats, with the senior ranks, and say, regardless of anything before today, I am your Secretary of State. I rely on this staff. I defend you. I have your back.
As Trump was cutting Tillerson loose this morning, security teams on the U.S.-Mexico border were preparing for a presidential visit. Trump flew to a patch of desert east of San Diego to inspect prototypes for a border wall, which he described as a barrier against hellish violence.
If you don't have a wall system, we're not going to have a country. There's a lot of problems in Mexico. They have a lot of problems over there.
That message is resonating, not just with the people Trump says he's protecting, but with the people he's trying to keep out.
Me siento como que cada día pues los hacen a un lado, ¿verdad? Como que tuviéramos alguna epidemia, algo que que afectamos a los demás, porque eso es lo que me hace entender a mí. A mí me causa, en lo personal, me causa cierta nostalgia, porque nos dividen como seres humanos y no debería pasar eso. Al contrario, al lugar de dividirlos, los deberíamos de unir más, para que las cosas fueran mejores. No, pues mi nombre es Jorge Hernández Amaya. Estamos en Tijuana. Es la primera pared que hacemos de un cuarto. Y ahí lo que ellos construyen es diferente, pues. Esto es para proteger y aquello no es para detener.
Pues si no nos quiere él a nosotros allá, tampoco nosotros lo queremos acá. ¿A qué viene? No tiene nada que hacer acá. Hasta ahorita tengo 16 años aquí, nunca he tenido un problema. Bien tranquilo. Pobre señor, tan ignorante de veras. Está cerrado. Porque él come de la mano del mexicano también. ¿Ah? Porque a un americano no se va a ir a trabajar al fil. Los mexicanos somos los que vamos. ¿Ah? Pero pues es su país, él sabrá. Así que estoy acostumbrada a ver las láminas. No nos afecta y nos beneficia. Está gastando dinero a lo tonto, la verdad. ¿Ah? Mejor que lo done frijoles a las gentes que necesitan.
Cuando hay necesidad no creo que haya nada que lo pueda tener a uno. No sé, porque el hambre es muy dura. Y más cuando hay personas que uno ama y quiere, ¿verdad?, a su lado, a su responsabilidad, más. No creo que... Bueno, no hay obstáculo que lo pueda tener a uno porque...
Yesterday, President Trump killed what would have been the biggest technology deal in history, the proposed $117 billion acquisition of the American chipmaker Qualcomm by the Singapore-based Broadcom. In an executive order, Trump said the deal threatened to, quote, impair the national security of the United States. He did this because last week, something unusual happened. A little-known panel called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., or CFIUS, issued a warning for the first time ever.
It's unprecedented to see the committee work this hard against a deal before it's even been filed.
CFIUS is led by the current Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin. It includes heads of the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, Commerce, Defense, State, and Energy. It was initially created in 1975 as a way to monitor foreign investment in American firms. But in the 1980s, Americans got really worried about Japanese companies buying up American technology firms. So in 1988, Congress gave the president the power to block mergers deemed risky. Over the years, that power has been used as a national security tool, but also to advance a protectionist agenda. CFIUS operates in secrecy. Typically, a party in a merger voluntarily asks the committee to review the deal. But the committee can act on its own, which is what it did in Broadcom-Qualcomm. It doesn't even have to disclose that it's investigating a deal or why a deal might not be acceptable. For instance, when CFIUS put out a letter saying that the Qualcomm deal raised, quote, potential national security concerns, it cited national security as the reason it couldn't say what those concerns were. The committee can recommend the deal continue or be killed, at which point the president can officially block it. But even a hint of opposition from CFIUS is often enough to scrap a deal, without the president having to step in. Vetting deals for national security makes sense. But over the years, CFIUS has often been used to protect American companies under the guise of national security. Lately, that's meant stopping China. In 2005, it stopped a Chinese company from purchasing an American oil company. And in just the last year, it's blocked several Chinese companies from buying American technology firms. Broadcom isn't Chinese, but CFIUS is worried that if it buys Qualcomm, which is America's biggest maker of chips for mobile devices, it might cut research spending, which would let China eclipse the US in the race to dominate 5G network technology. And experts worry that if we're dependent on foreign companies for 5G technology, there could be security risks.
Americans have kind of woken up to the fact that they don't really have a telecom industry anymore, between Lucent going out of business and Motorola. And so they might be clinging desperately to the last crown jewel here, which would be Qualcomm.
Congress is now considering a bill to expand CFIUS authority. And given how easy it is to argue that technology companies are key to national security, it's safe to say Qualcomm won't be the last foreign merger Trump will keep from happening.
In 2014, the body of a 15-year-old Indigenous girl, Tina Fontaine, was found wrapped in plastic at the bottom of a river in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Last month, her accused murderer was acquitted.
Racism is still ugly and is still alive.
That verdict set off protests from Indigenous people and their supporters, who say the Canadian government doesn't do nearly enough to protect their communities. Which is why a group called the Bear Clan Patrol has been keeping watch at night in Winnipeg and other cities ever since Fontaine's death.
Send me a picture of her. I need your contact information. I need a physical description because the picture is blurry. It doesn't tell me if she's 6 foot tall or 5 feet tall. Let's just make sure we're all connected again.
James Favel is the executive director of the Bear Clan.
Back, please.
Check.
Why did you start the Bear Clan Patrol in the first place?
When Tina Fontaine's body was pulled out of a Red River, that was it. I said we couldn't wait any longer.
The Bear Clan Patrol is a group of volunteers who, ever since Tina Fontaine's murder, walk the streets of Winnipeg in small teams. They carry naloxone kits for overdoses, tell would-be Johns to move along, help families search for missing children, and try to keep the peace.
In July of 2015, we came out with a commitment to our community 4 nights a week, Thursday through Sunday, and we've just been at it ever since. And it's just been growing and growing and growing from there. We wanted to live better lives in our community. We knew it was going to take an investment. It had to come from the community. It wasn't going to come from the feds. It wasn't going to come from any other agency. It had to be us. Sure.
The Bear Clan's self-help ethos is a direct response to what they see as systematic racism. Racism that plays itself out in everyday encounters and that they say leads the authorities to neglect crimes committed against Indigenous people.
My wife, standing in our front yard, the car would drive by and slow down and ask if she wanted to make $20. My daughter couldn't come home from school without being badgered by John here in the community.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a woman in this community that doesn't have a story like that.
For many, that neglect was exemplified by the acquittal in the Fontaine case, which hundreds of people protested in Winnipeg last month.
She galvanized our community when she passed away, and now the injustice that continues to surround her case also, again, reminds us that there's still much more work ahead to do to make it right for people like her.
Indigenous women make up just 4% of all women in Canada, but account for 16% of all women murdered between 1980 and 2012, according to a 2014 report from the Canadian Police. And some estimates indicated the percentage of Indigenous women murdered is even higher, close to 42%.
There are thousands of other girls in Tina's situation right now, and all of us in Canada are responsible for that.
Among Carolyn's top priorities will be the creation of a national public inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada.
2 years ago, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did appoint a $54 million National Inquiry Commission to look into the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women. But that inquiry has yet to issue a report, and protesters blame the Canadian police and the government for failing to respond with urgency. We asked the Winnipeg police about that criticism. They said, "We don't make commentary on social issues or on general, non-specific criticism," and added that their officers occasionally partner up on walks with the Bear Clan. The Bear Clan Patrol, for its part, keeps growing. It's now in 13 cities and has more than 1,000 members in Winnipeg alone, doing what they can to protect their own.
Yes. Is this the Bear Clan? Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's what I kind of thought.
None of this is really rocket science. None of what we're doing is all that special. It's just the fact that we're the ones doing it. You guys clean up the neighborhood or what? We're trying to do it.
Thank you. Have a good night, you guys.
Yeah, take care.
Today is the 5th anniversary of Pope Francis's papacy. And since he took charge of the Vatican, he's been a popular pontiff, one who's put a progressive gloss on social issues like divorce and LGBT rights, and who's helped rebrand the scandal-ridden Catholic Church of recent years. Instead of being known for rocking designer Italian shoes, this pope is more likely to be seen washing the bare feet of Muslim refugees. But Francis promised more than a fresh look for the church. He pledged to fundamentally reform it. Caroline Mataresi-Tehrani examines whether the pope has lived up to his own hype.
When Pope Francis took office, there were two big issues plaguing the church: clerical sexual abuse and the Vatican's opaque finances. He promised to deal with both. Francis vowed that the church would no longer tolerate or protect clerical sexual abusers. In the years since, he's publicly addressed survivors.
Dios llora. Los crímenes y pecados de los abusos sexuales a menores no pueden ser mantenidos en secreto por más tiempo.
And he formed a commission in 2013 to advise the church on how to handle abuse cases. One of the commission's members was Marie Collins, a survivor of clerical abuse who quit a year ago in frustration.
She has said all the right things about abuse and how it must be stopped, and perpetrators, there's no place for them in the church. And all that's very positive. The problem was that as time went on, although he approved all the policy changes and structural changes that the Commission recommended, the Curia, the bureaucracy, the administration in the Vatican resisted the changes, and that's where, Francis didn't follow through. He didn't push with the implementation side. We haven't heard of any bishops being removed. We haven't heard of any disciplinary procedures being taken.
Francis caused a firestorm in January when he publicly defended Chilean Bishop Juan Barros, who's been accused of covering up for a paedophile priest. His comments were greeted with outrage, but the Pope likened the reports of a cover-up to fake news.
He basically judged the survivors without speaking to them and has supported the clerical side in Chile, which is a real misstep. It's going back to the old days when the clergy believed other clergy, but didn't believe the victims.
Francis's pledge to reform the Vatican's finances has also gone unfulfilled.
It wasn't until the middle of World War II, 1942, that the Vatican formed the famous Vatican Bank. And that's sort of a cross between, let's say, a Goldman Sachs and a Federal Reserve.
That's Gerald Posner, author of God's Bankers and an expert on the Vatican Bank.
We're talking $15, $20 billion in terms of assets. But in terms of what the Vatican itself has, we're talking about a very wealthy organization, which deals often in cash because much of the money raised, especially in third world missions and around the world for charities, is in cash. It's very hard for it to be accountable.
How much accountability has there been under previous popes around the bank and its staff?
Under previous popes, before Francis, there was almost no accountability about the Vatican Bank, and that's why it was the Wild West often in terms of finances. In the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And finally, in comes Pope Benedict, the previous pope, and he's forced to put in some accounting rules by the European Union. But Francis is the one who is faced with the decisions. How do I try to modernize this bank? Can it be done?
But Posner says in reality, it's just as shady as ever.
In the first year, it looked as though he was going to revolutionize finances in the Vatican. He established, for instance, this Council for the Economy. He made a secretariat for the economy, a whole new division that was intended to implement reform. And he created an independent auditor general designed to keep everyone honest. Now, that all sounded fantastic, but today there's no auditor general. He quit last year in sort of a real controversy back and forth. The secretariat is really adrift. So much of the original early promise of Francis hasn't lived up to it a few years afterwards.
The Vatican has always been resistant to change, as Francis suggested last year, quoting an 18th century joke in a talk to bishops.
Fare le riforme a Roma È come pulire la Sfinge di Egitto con uno spazzolino da denti.
But it's hard to gauge how long he'll be able to dine out on the goodwill he's already garnered when people look for concrete action and don't find it.
Yep. Get out of here.
Wow.
My mom would not like that at all.
When you smile, the stars align. Flower of the universe.
That was beautiful. It sounded like Roberta Flack, but I know it's not Roberta Flack. Just the sadness in that lady's voice. And also, is that a harp? I'm a big fan of the harp as well. Thumbs up.
I just kept trying to remember what Rolling Stones record that was on.
It's Sade.
No kidding.
Huh.
I hear it now.
I got a bag of 2 and I dropped out of school. I'm going up, check my vertical. Fucking man, I'm breaking every rule. TMZ harassing me, I got a camera crew. I'm addicted to shopping, so everything brand new.
I love that beat.
I'm sure there's an app that just has that. It sounds like 20 808 kick drums synced up at the same time. The first lyric that I heard that he said he was addicted to Shabbos, I thought like we're really going somewhere interesting, but it turned out to just be about shopping. And so then they lost me pretty soon after that. Is that Oneida? I play with them sometimes. I've played that song. Way better without me. Tons better.
The organ, the repeating organ bass part that definitely had that Suicide, Krautrock, Oneida through line, shall we say?
Through line. Like that was super dubby, nightmarish, and really fun. Peace to Kid Millions, get better. I feel like I should listen to that for a month before I say anything about it. Tempos were shifting, bass lines were sliding around, and way to make songs for headphones in 2018. It's just a great, eyes closed experience.
You know, kids on your bicycles, don't listen to this with headphones on. I mean, it's
distracting.
It is.
It is.
Just a PSA.
It needs to be said.
That's Vice News Tonight for Tuesday, March 13th.